Broadcasting live. It's America's longest running talk show on computers. It's Computer America, bringing you the biggest names in technology with guest interviews, new products, and your emails. Listen live at computeramerica.com on any device around the world. Email the show at live@computeramerica.com or find us on social media. Be sure to check out our website for contests, giveaways, show notes, live video stream, podcasts, and more. You're listening to Computer America.
Hello and welcome into the Computer America Show. We are the nation's longest running, nationally syndicated radio talk show on computers and technology. Thank you for joining us. I'm your host, Ben Crossman, and everyone out there, thank you so much for tuning into the show. Today on the program, we have none other than Lux Research. That'll be the first part of the program. And if you're wondering about that, every show that we have, we try to dedicate the first part to a great guest, be they authors, be they product managers, and, just people that we really feel would bring an interesting conversation and of course, an interesting point of view. So we certainly hope that you enjoyed today's program. In the second part of the show, we will be doing computer and technology news, time permitting. We have a lot of news to cover as well, where we try to keep up on it and keep you informed. And I guess I should mention before we get started, computeramerica.com. That's where you'll find everything, including the show notes. If you want to link to our guest website or anything that we talk about, any videos that we show, anything and everything will be in the show notes after the program. Let's see. And last but not least, check out some of our recent reviews, and we should have some articles coming up. Hopefully tonight, I'll be able to sit down and find some time and write not a how-to, but more like a tips and tricks on how to shop online, obviously with Black Friday, Cyber Monday coming up. It's going to be super important. And remember, not all deals are actually deals. So be careful out there. Lots of stuff going on over at Computer America. Find us on social media at Computer America. And I think that's enough. I think we should just go ahead and bring in our guest. And as I said before, Lux Research, if you haven't heard about them, they do a lot of great, research, and they really delve in depth into certain topics. And one of them that really caught our eye because we reported on it during our computer and technology news segment was this idea. And I'm sure that our guest is going to have the exact, naming. I think it was like Nightingale or something like that, where Google was collecting health data, and I can't even say that it was illegal because I think under certain laws, hospitals are certainly allowed to share your data with third parties as they see fit, but it raised a lot of questions. It wasn't strictly illegal, and I think that's the problem. Is that people were like, "Wow, how could they be doing this?" So here to talk about this with us is none other than Mr. Nardev. Ramanathan, and hopefully I said that right. And everyone, if you want to check that out, luxresearchinc.com. We'll have a link in the show notes. But Nardev, I want to thank you for coming on to Computer America. How you doing?
Hi, Ben. Yeah, I'm doing really well. Really excited to be here today, and really excited to talk about this very relevant topic today. We get a lot of questions about this as well, and definitely, really happy to be here to shed some light on the topic.
Absolutely. So, and I thought, and of course, I thought a good place to start off would be a little bit of background for those of us who hadn't heard of Lux Research. Could you give us some background on that, and then a bit of background on yourself? Have you always been in, kind of in research, high tech? What's your background?
Absolutely, Ben. So real quick about Lux Research, I think you gave a really nice short introduction there. I'll just sort of expand on that a little bit. We're a technology consultancy and a strategic advisory firm, and we basically help our clients sort of navigate the often challenging sort of decision-making processes they have to make internally in terms of, picking the right technologies, forming the right partnerships, investing in the right opportunities, et cetera, et cetera. So we help them to sort of avoid typical pitfalls that we see often happen out there, and help our clients sort of hone down on the right decisions based on their key initiatives. We look at a number of different areas. On my end, I lead the digital health and wellness practice at Lux Research. So really looking at all sorts of digital technologies that are supporting.
You must be a very busy man with that area.
Yeah, absolutely, Ben. It's a lot of interesting things going on. From from things like Theranos, to very interesting, it's been a very interesting year as well. We've seen some interesting IPOs, some very interesting technologies ranging from wearables to smart textile, etc., etc. So a lot of interesting things there. A real quick sort of maybe I'll spend a couple of minutes to just talk about myself. So I did a PhD in biochemistry, and for some time I was kind of in the lab, kind of doing lab work, enjoying all of that.
Well, and sorry to jump in there, just PhD in chemistry is what you said, right?
Clinical biochemistry, yeah.
And I'm sorry, my brother's actually about one semester away of getting his PhD in chemistry. So biochemistry,
wow.
that's a little bit different. So I was like, oh, hey, another one. But I'm sorry, go on.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's sort of quite narrow field.
Yeah.
Very clinical oriented. Obviously, looking at sort of human diseases, but we looked at. It was really interesting actually. We looked at sort of rare genetic mutations that lead to a disease that's actually quite complete opposite of obesity, which is the sort of the bigger problem out there. So we looked at the opposite end of the spectrum to look at people who actually cannot make fats, and then try to sort of understand what's causing that in the first place, and potentially find ways we can use that knowledge to develop drugs to treat obesity. So that was the concept anyway, and it's interesting. Yeah, it's good fun. We came up with some interesting new mutations that wasn't known before, so that was pretty fun.
And of course that that background mixed with kind of a research firm, I can see where obviously mixing, if you have any kind of interest in tech, that would go very, like, your experience and background would actually be very helpful for what you're doing now.
Absolutely, Ben. I think that foundational sort of years was really helpful for me to go deep and understand, what some of these technologies are really aiming to address, how they're doing that. Allows me to have the sort of interesting discussions and to sort of really go deep into some of the workings and the sort of philosophy behind some of these technologies as well. So absolutely, it's been critical in what I do today as well.
Right. So thank you for the background. Thank you for the background on Lux Research. And I wanted to kind of broach this topic because just to give everyone kind of a primer for what we've covered, and I think that our organization is probably pretty typical, although we are a bit more into the tech side than the healthcare side. We have covered on the show this idea that Google was found, or I believe it was a whistleblower from within the Google organization. He kind of, I'm sorry, I wasn't sure if it was a he or she. They felt that they needed to come forward to the press and say that this is what Google is doing. And they were collecting millions of health records, and I think even to the extent of which health records, because I've heard of things like which prescriptions, which hospitals, things like that. But overall, I think we weren't really too sure the full breadth of, or at least I wasn't sure of the full breadth of health data that they were collecting. But essentially, Google, this giant data vacuum, was sucking up data that people thought was confidential between them and their insurance or their healthcare provider. That was kind of our audience's understanding. That was my understanding. If you'd like to expand on that or fix anything that I said, Nardev, please feel free to.
Yeah, no, Ben, absolutely. I think that's the sort of the source of the confusion, because Google's coming along to say, hey, we did everything by the books. This is completely not news, because we did announce, in fact, and they did actually announce in July that they were working with Ascension Health to actually help them to sort of improve their cooperations and enhance their productivity by enabling more of these sort of digital transformation processes to improve how they operate, which is all fine. But they never actually mentioned about Project Nightingale, right?
Yeah.
And in fact, the whole premise, sort of the understanding, was that they are working with them to help them operate better. But what the whole whistleblowing really was about was not so much about the actual sort of agreement they had, but what they're actually doing with the data, right? Basically, they are peeking into this health data and getting these sort of insights based on that information to develop tools that they can then sort of eventually profiteer from, right? And which is, just saying that alone, that's not illegal, but they should be actually asking the consent of patients. Pretty much like if you think about your pharmaceutical trials, right?
Yeah.
Where you have informed consent up front.
That's and really that's what that was kind of my takeaway, was that it wasn't illegal, and it was legal, but it doesn't feel legal. It's this idea that that healthcare providers, and of course Google, can collect this. And I read that past legislation that was to help, I think, like hospitals and insurance companies, I guess, provide better care for the patients. They had a law on the book already that allowed them to do this. But, I think back in the 90s when it was introduced, Google really didn't exist then. Like these giant tech and data firms didn't exist yet. It's kind of like when the telegraph laws are applied to the internet. It just seems so dated, I guess.
Exactly, Ben. He's spot on. If you think about, sort of HIPAA, right, which is the law that's sort of governing all of this. HIPAA was sort of signed into law in 1996 during the Clinton administration. And you're right, that's about 23 years ago, when a lot of these ecosystems have not evolved to be the way they are. HIPAA was intended to sort of designed to protect personal health information, really, and enforced on sort of covered entities, or really healthcare providers, healthcare plans, research institutions using their data. But, they were never, at that point when they were drafted and signed into law, they did not take into account the fact that, these data can be used outside the United States borders or can be used on the internet, right? So the laws were not designed to protect that. So international transmission of health information really relies today on a lot of voluntary agreements and sort of, it's like a code of honor, right? Where, they have that understanding. But technically, if someone violates that agreement, there's no regulation. At least HIPAA doesn't have any way to enforce anything on people who violate that sort of agreements. So that is the challenge there.
Well, and really, when it comes to the data, I guess it's there's a very knee-jerk reaction to Google. It's Google's one of those companies that it's like Google, Facebook, Apple, Amazon, these large tech companies, and even Microsoft to a lesser extent, that when you mention them, they, not that they can't do, and it's not that they can't do anything right, which is a double negative, which means that Google does a lot of great research, and really the advancements that they're making with artificial intelligence and whatnot in a lot of fields is very impressive. But from a consumer and really just from an audience point of view, they're also seen as an untrustworthy giant because they profit off of knowing everything. And I guess this is one of the things that, have people on edge, kind of like you mentioned, this is just going to be between you and I and the audience, but, just kind of your personal feelings. Google as a company, do you feel like that they kind of get a pass for what they do? Let's just, kind of stick to legally. Do you think that everything that they do is, how altruistic do you think Google is? Because obviously, every time that, something like this comes up with Google, they says, oh, we're trying to save everyone money. We're trying to improve efficiency. We're trying to do X, Y, Z. How much altruism would you attribute to Google in this mission?
Yeah, Ben. I mean, those are great points. I mean, the thing is, end of the day, we need these tech companies to sort of play a big role in the evolution of the healthcare system as well, as more and more, the health itself is really being governed a lot by algorithms and a lot of technology. And these tech players, not just Google, even Amazon, Apple, Microsoft, are all playing a big role in supporting the data infrastructure, the ability to work in these sort of environments using cloud computing capabilities, all of that, right? And with Google, so this is what, this is something that we've been seeing a lot in Lux, is that Google has actually they've been always interested in healthcare, but they've never really had a major success story if you think about it. Unlike, if you think about, Apple, that's seeing a lot of success, certainly in their wearable devices, and they're increasingly, sort of positioning their smartwatches to be, embedded with ECGs. They're trying to go more and more closer to the clinical space. Whereas Google, if you think about it, they had a huge failure with their, the smart lens, right? Where with Verily, they were working with Novartis, Alcon, I believe, with Novartis, where they're trying to actually develop smart lens that can actually pick up your blood glucose from your tears. And that was a huge it was sort of a large a statement to make when they sort of embarked on that. They were pretty confident, hey, we're going to come into health and we're going to kind of completely change health. And all that. There's a lot of, I would even say bordering on trash talk. Yeah. And they failed on that. Like, it was a huge failure. They were kind of just not talking about it for a long time. Everyone was wondering what's going on. And then that failed, right? And then, they tried various other things. Verily had their own wearables. They were trying to compete with Apple, and then they even hired, some big names from pharmaceuticals and healthcare organizations to sort of head off their healthcare efforts. It never really took off, right? So, whereas if you think about Amazon, your Apple, right, these two companies in particular, they've had fairly interesting, I would say, success. Apple certainly very sort of coordinated strategy. Apple sort of now is certainly one of the biggest wearable players, dominating that market.
Yeah.
Pushing Fitbit out. Google recently bought Fitbit to try to get an advantage there, but that's certainly a great move. But with this sort of news coming out, that clearly puts them in a tough position. But I guess I'll sort of get to the point here. What I'm trying to get at is that Google is really trying to get ahead in the healthcare strategy. And this, from what they're doing here, and based on sort of their reaction on how they're reacting, their press responses, sounding almost a bit awkward, trying to be defensive, trying to be all secretive about it, it's clear that they're trying to get a competitive edge very quietly and trying to sort of just leapfrog over Amazon and Apple. It's all, from what we see, this is sort of a competitive play. But clearly it's backfired on them, right? When, they didn't engage the patient community. They should have, come along and say, hey, we want to actually build solutions for you for the benefit of patients. Let's have a consent, or let's have an engagement. Let's talk to you. Let's make sure you understand what we're doing. That was something they never did.
So yeah, and so a couple points I wanted to make here. I think the first one, let's go ahead and talk about that. And it's this idea of essentially Google not even getting permission, because they don't need permission, as we've seen. They can do this anyways, but having an open dialogue with the people whose data they are collecting. And we know this because there was someone who came forth from within the Google organization that said, hey, I work with all this data and I don't think Google should have access to all this data. Do you think that a whistleblower in this situation was warranted? Do you think someone coming out and talking about this was warranted? Or do you think Google, do you think that they were upfront as they needed to be about it?
It's a great question, man. I'm afraid I don't have a very definitive answer to that, because it's all pretty gray.
Yeah.
But you're right in that Google doesn't have to actually, they're not required to actually go and seek that consent, because there's no sort of law that's
the company that first collects the data is governed by HIPAA law and things like that. Of course, Google is to some extent, but by the other companies making backdoor deals with Google, Google doesn't have to get anyone's consent. They just have to get the consent of the company that has the data. They did everything, I guess, kind of okay, and that's where the gray area is.
Yeah, exactly. And now sort of, I guess, the whistleblower coming out to sort of say, hey, Google's doing that. Obviously the fact that someone had to come out to say that, hey, this is not right. We don't know what exactly they're doing with the data. how much they're going into that, what they're using, and so on and so forth. So in fact, I think it was somewhere this year where actually Google, they came out, they had a showcase where they were showing, they're showcasing the capabilities to pass through some medical records, some X-rays and images like that, where actually they were then told that they actually left an identifier for some patients in some of those images. Yeah, you can actually look it up. It's there. Yeah, and it was embarrassing for Google because it's clearly they did not make an effort to really sort of cleanse all of that carefully. So that's just something that's public. So back end, we don't know what's going on. Clearly this whistleblower has seen a lot, enough that he or she is troubled by it and came out to voice concerns. Now, it could be that he or she is just super sensitive and feels it's not right and it's morally wrong. So they had to say something, and actually that's all fine. Or, it could be that, they are, sort of using that data for, whatever reason that, may eventually be illegal. We don't know. But you're right in the sense that, sort of they have this agreement with Ascension and they are abiding by whatever sort of regulation that, sort of governs that agreement. So that's all fine. But so let me give you an analogy here, and I think this is something that I discussed with some of my colleagues as well.
Sure.
So if you think about, say, if you are putting some documents in a bank safe, right, and you put it in the bank, and then one day the bank decides, hey, we need to upgrade our safes to a new model, or we need to move to a new location, so we need to sort of engage someone to help us with that, and so they engage a third party. Let's call that company X. Right. And our company X, if they were just to move all the contents without ever looking at it, it's a pure logistics problem, right? They're just moving all of that, and that's fine. And even then, probably the bank will let you know, hey, we are having this sort of upgrade, or we're having this shift. So we're working with these third-party guys who are going to do that, and all that. Now, imagine this company X now then opens up all these safes, opens up all these documents, looks at it, documents everything, builds an AI database, and maybe this company X they're innovative, right? So they want to build an AI database that can predict what each user is likely to store, so you can design some sort of algorithm to design the ideal safe structure or size or whatever, right? And then they, and who knows, they might even monetize that information to other vendors or other parties as well. And then they put all of that back and they never let you know, right? Now, then the question is that wrong or right? So that's one way to think about it, right? Where what they're doing with the data, we don't know. So that's where the big question mark lies. And I think, in the days to come, I think some inquiries are open, federal inquiries are open on them to sort of get them to answer some of these questions. We'll see what happens. But that's where the question mark is. We really don't.
Yeah, and so branching off of your analogy there, I did want to say that, and this is something that data is intrinsically different than, like, even, let's say, a paper document, because a paper document, you could take it to a scanner or whatever and scan it 1,000 times, then you have 1,000 pieces of paper. Data is literally just, can be replicated infinite number of times. You don't need, infinite numbers, pieces of paper. And so I guess for Google to essentially keep a copy of everything that they were supposed to be moving, and I'm assuming you're saying moving from place to place, because Google was contracted by these healthcare providers to essentially digitize and better bring their records into the future so that they could be searchable and things like that. So that's essentially the moving part of your analogy. But here's my kind of question about that, is that when let's say Google said that, hey, we can do that for you and we're going to bring you into the 21st century, part of that was, I'm sure, building an AI. Like, they always intended to do that from the beginning. Otherwise, I don't think they would have taken the job if they couldn't keep the data for themselves. It's just this, that is a very gray area, because they're not the only keepers of the data anymore. The company who first owned it still has that data. It's just now they get to, I guess, play with this new toy that they made off the back of other companies.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing. Like, there's no sort of regulation to govern, how they operate and use that information and what they can actually do with that information. I mean, in Europe, right, you have the GDPR that's
Yes.
kind of trying to address that a little bit more in depth.
And
Uh, but
and sorry to step on you here real quick, but just for all of our audience out there who may not be very familiar with it, the way that we've explained it in Nardev, if you want to correct this, but I've been telling people this for ever since GDPR came out. But essentially, GDPR attempts to reshift the idea that data isn't belonging to those who collect the data, as in Facebook or Google. Instead, the data is owned by the person who is who the data is about. So essentially, if you have Ben's address, then Ben is the owner of that data, and Ben can request any company that has that data to either remove it, show me that you have it, things like that. GDPR essentially tries to shift the idea that data is not kind of ambiguous, and whoever collects it gets it. It's, Ben is the owner of Ben's data. That's the goal of GDPR.
yeah, yeah, beautiful explanation. And GDPR extends to genomic data as well. I mean, that's sort of maybe not a discussion for today, but they have also covered the use of genomic data to say you're the owner of the genomic data, because that's becoming a big sort of
Yeah.
area of debate as well. But anyway,
Yeah.
yeah, that's so I think the US is sort of looking to try to change that from what we understand. There's a lot of sort of discussions about what to do next, but that hopefully this sort of situation actually just gets our legislators to think about this a bit deeper in terms of how this should be sort of governed. But
Do and because we brought up GDPR, and there has been a lot of backlash by these big tech companies that I feel like any form of regulation and compliance to a certain law is going to be just outright the worst thing for tech companies that they can think of, because then they have to pay money to comply. They have to change the way that they operate. Obviously, these tech companies, they don't like the GDPR, but I'm not saying that America has to adopt, such wide-reaching legislation. But would you say overall, any kind of legislation on data, is it necessary? Because hey, we are where we are with a very light touch on data regulation and tech company regulation. Do you think that's sustainable, or is it time to maybe adopt something closer to GDPR in America?
yeah, it's a great question. So I think the challenge is, the concern is always if, what happens if these companies misuse my data? What's going to happen to me? That's sort of the underlying, like, how will it impact me? How will it impact sort of my future opportunities? How health insurers might think about, covering me and things like that. But for Google, obviously, this is a question. It's a business, right? They are in the tech business. They are looking to build better tools to work with, the healthcare industry to bring in their capabilities to support that, and we want that. So nothing wrong has been done as such. At least again, based on what we know, and we do need this is a step in the right direction in the sense of we need companies to come in and bring in new sort of capabilities to make these systems sort of more optimized, more efficient. Allowing a lot of these data silos, right, to sort of talk to each other, to be more interoperable. All of these things are important, but the question mark is always what if, right? That's what if is always the sort of fear that sits behind the mind of people, and that's sort of the typical barrier to it. And in some cases, legislators come up with sort of very hardline regulation that then just pushes back all these tech companies to say, hey, now we don't want to go into healthcare because it doesn't make sense for us anymore. We've got to
Yeah.
comply to 100 billion rules. And by the time that happens, like, a new technology will come out anyway, and just wasting our time, right?
Yeah.
And the FDA actually, sort of was very, they came up with a pre-certification system where they're working with developers like Apple and Samsung and Garmin where they, sort of coming up with a way where they can work on, being more sort of supportive. They approve the developer to come up with the tool first and ensure they have the post-marketing surveillance and things like that. So maybe something, a more sort of hybrid sort of a legislation might be able to, be some sort of a nice midway that sort of it's not completely, there's no way to address this at all, but not completely sort of draconian as well. Would be interesting to see. But I don't know how they're going to do it, though. It's going to be a huge challenge. It's going to take a while.
And really that's what I always try to impart to my listeners, is that they, and by they I mean the people on Capitol Hill, not only do they have to legislate on farming equipment and farming regulation, not only do they have to do law enforcement and law enforcement procedure, not only do they have to do more touchy things like gun legislation, healthcare, abortion, blah blah. Like, these legislators have to deal with every one of these issues, and I'm barely keeping a decent grasp on the tech sector. I can't imagine one person, and not to be I barely keep a grasp on this, and I do this every single day. I can't imagine keeping that for 100 different topics and being able to write law that would be able to effectively, kind of regulate these industries. It seems like an impossible task, but something, and I truly do believe this, and I kind of echo you. There has to be something out there that does not push them away from these sectors, because what Google is doing, just like what we had IBM Research on the show when they were talking about, their efforts in identifying cancer just from pictures. And, it's not going to replace doctors, but it's effective as an augmentation tool to cancer screening. And it's very, very effective. Tech companies are doing great work. It's just, should we allow them to be doing everything that they're doing? No, it's just, how do you write the law? And that's very complicated.
Exactly. It's, I do not envy the job of the legislators. From what I hear, there's not many of them, right? It's a small, I don't know the exact number, but it's not like an army
600.
of them.
600, and then there's an army of researchers and assistants and things like that. But there's about 600 legislators, right?
Yeah, and that's just Ben, from what you said, like the number of different areas they need to look into. It's just a lot of work and a lot of research, and all these things are going to impact the lives of all Americans. So that's a huge thing.
And Nardev, sorry to jump from topic to topic. And if you're okay, let me know if you need to go. But I did want to ask you a couple more things. And one of them is, due to your background, I'm assuming that you worked in a lab, and you mentioned your work with trying to find people who couldn't generate fats, and maybe helping obesity by kind of using that that kind of treatment. But I'm assuming that you worked in a research lab, and about, not to get too into the funding of private research labs and or I should say in academic and research labs in general, but the funding, and a lot of things come down to money. Do you think that tech companies, with not only their ability to generate their own capital, but their ability to go to private investment firms, because if Google ever wants to say, private investment firms, we want to get into the healthcare sector, we're going to need $100 billion in capital, and they're going to go, I'm sure $100 billion is completely overkill, but they're going to be able to go to their investors and say, we want more money to do this. And they're going to go, sure, pay it back when you can. Research labs, though, they have to get grants. They have to apply. They, there's a smaller pool of money to go around for a lot of projects, and a lot of projects go, unfortunately, underfunded. Do you think that just the economics of how we develop, I guess, kind of healthcare solutions, and really from a clinical perspective, because there's nothing saying that an organization like MIT couldn't have done the exact same thing, because I know that IBM works with MIT works with just about everyone. This kind of research that Google is doing could have been done in the public sector, but instead Google tried to beat everyone to the punch. Do you think that funding plays a role in all of this?
100%, Ben. I mean, funding is sort of the crux of a lot of healthcare research, to be honest. And I think like what you talked about, tech companies coming in, with their sort of deep pockets to be able to push some of this forward is what we do need more of. So that's it's a completely different ball game, and yeah.
Yeah, and I know that there really is much to say there. I just know that kind of with my association to my brother, he many Christmas dinners have been spent, or Christmas or Thanksgiving dinners is probably more appropriate, have been spent complaining about the fact of research grants and money and things like that. And I just thought that what Google is doing with artificial intelligence is amazing, but it's not just Google. There's a lot of companies and a lot of public institutions that are working with the exact same technology. It's just that Google has that name brand recognition and the money to kind of go out and do it on their own. So it's and really that's not healthcare in America. That's kind of the research side in America is very, I guess, lacking.
Yeah. Exactly.
So
I mean, I'm going to,
and it's fine if you don't feel like expanding on that. Let's go ahead and get a little bit, and I'm just going to go over the questions here and see if there's any kind of spaces that we did. And you already mentioned that this could hurt Google's momentum in the healthcare space. You mentioned the acquisition of Fitbit. We kind of glossed over that. A lot of the data that we're talking about that Google currently has is one thing, and then it's this idea that really and just from comments that we received on videos and things like that, and comments that we received through the phone, I will say that Google buying Fitbit had the same reaction. I'm sure Nardev, that if you recall, when Facebook tried to introduce the Facebook portal, they didn't want to talk about it, but they certainly launched it, and everyone was like, wait, Facebook, the data sucker, wants to put a camera in my home? And then Google bought Fitbit. Everyone's like, wait, the data sucker wants to put a wearable on my wrist? I almost got the same reaction there, that we don't quite trust these companies with data, even though they own like most of it.
Yeah. I mean, actually, I don't know if you might have seen some news. Actually, a lot of Fitbit users are actually dropping off the moment Google bought Fitbit.
Really?
It's news. It's already happening. And I mean, end of the day, companies like Google and I guess we touched about this earlier as well. They are looking at business opportunities. They are looking at they need huge data sets to be able to generate more sort of devices or analytic tools that can give you more precise information, right? One of the challenges today with wearables still is that you kind of get a lot of generic information, right? Like walk more, walk less, sleep less.
Yeah.
But what does that mean to me? Like, and actually, part of what we do at Lux Research is we get a chance to speak to a lot of startups. And I've actually spoken to startups that are looking to tackle this challenge. Like, can we get more personalized recommendations that we can then sort of also follow up with outcomes and then, reiterate that and sort of get a more personalized recommendation that is unique to me. And the only way they can do that is to study like massive sets of data, but also sort of your own longitudinal data, right? Like if they keep studying, what's sort of how your day-to-day physiology or sleep patterns and so on, that's when they can give you more personalized information. But to do that, they have to get access to these data sets. They have to get access to large data sets to make the generalization, to understand trends, all these weak signals. So back to your point also, Ben, I think, they need to do that to come up with these tools. And then when people complain that, hey, I have all these generic stuff, like it's not that helpful, the answer is, hey, actually they have to get access to the data sets. But then the question is, do you trust them enough?
Yeah.
And that's where the challenge is today. And if, like, back to the point, if Google was sort of more transparent, sort of more engaged, and always sort of speaking to the users and saying, "Hey guys, this is the new thing that we're going to do." But it's hard as well. I mean, you have to.
I kind of
Yeah,
laugh at that because
yeah,
whenever one of these tech companies and whenever Facebook or Google are dragged by their ear in front of Congress, or they have one of their own events, and the head of the company goes out on stage, they're going to go every year. It's like clockwork. They're going to go, "We're going to work on transparency. We're going to be more open about what we're doing." And then it turns out that it's nice to hear. It doesn't really happen though.
yeah. It just slows them down, to be honest. Because companies like Google, they want to get ahead quickly. They want to move fast. They want to compete with Apple. They want to compete with Amazon. Apple already has that buy-in from their legion of loyal users, right? I mean, they just did a huge study with Stanford University, 400,000 volunteers to study if their Apple smartwatch can predict atrial fibrillation in advance. The largest ever atrial fibrillation study
I
done to
remember that.
date,
Yeah.
right? It's huge. And only Apple can command that sort of loyal following. People were happy to volunteer for that study. Does Google have that same clout? Maybe not yet. But the question is then, what should they do to get there? How can they engage their users better? If they are so focused on getting ahead, that's where they risk jeopardizing what they've worked for. And that's what, sort of is the crux of what I'm trying to sort of
Yeah.
convey to some of our clients as well, to say, hey, sure, it's good to get ahead, but if you sort of have these issues that sort of impact your reputation as someone that's trustable to work with, then it's going to impact in more intangible ways as well. And that's something that's really important to consider.
So yeah, let me throw a quote out here for you, and we're going to wrap up this conversation here in just a minute. But quote:
Sure.
Google's insatiable ambition to gain supremacy in healthcare without paying regard to this critical factor being data privacy and security, and and gaining a wider trust and acceptance from all healthcare stakeholders. Paying regard to this critical factor risks jeopardizing everything it had worked for to gain momentum in this space. End quote. Do you know who said that quote?
The one that you just mentioned,
Yes.
I think it's me.
It's you. Yes, absolutely. I'm reading from an article from The Independent.
Yeah.
And just to kind of echo your words with more of your words.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, at least you're consistent, and you're saying that if Google wants to continue with the space, then Project Nightingale is just one of them, and if they want to continue in the healthcare space, and trust me, CES is coming up here soon. I don't know if you've ever been at CES, Nardev, but the amount of health. Or like a couple of years ago, it was internet connected in general, and then healthcare became one of the fastest growing sectors in tech, and everyone wanted to connect your baby, connect your elderly, connect your everyday people, connect everything and anything to the internet. So this is something that is just going to continue, like even faster.
Absolutely, Ben. This is, CS. I wanted to go next year, but it's not going to happen due to
No.
some conflict. It's just some of my personal sort of
Yeah.
things here. But I mean, it's you're right. I mean, the healthcare space is evolving so fast. It's sort of the connectivity element. It's huge. It's really impacting how healthcare is sort of being accessed. Healthcare is now becoming more of an experience. Where in the past, when you say healthcare, everyone's just like shrugging their shoulders. It's like, oh, it's too complicated. There's so much regulation, blah, 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 right? But now everyone wants a piece of it. Even mobility companies, your Uber, your Lyft,
Yeah,
are
they'll
working
take you to your
hard
doctor's
as well,
appointments, right?
There you go. Exactly. Everyone wants a piece of it. So absolutely, back to your point. It's huge.
Yeah, it's huge. Getting of course, getting more. And I think with that, Nardev, I wanted to kind of give you one last shot at this. Is there any areas that we didn't cover about Project Nightingale, Google, their healthcare ambitions, things like that? I think that we did a really good job covering it, but anything that we missed?
No, I think I think we did a pretty sort of comprehensive roundup of this topic. Absolutely.
Perfect. And if people want to find out more information about anything that we talked about, we'll have links in the show notes. But I'll go ahead and give you, we're going to include a link to luxresearchinc.com. But if people want to find out more information, or and I know that obviously you give quotes to articles. I'm not sure if you write them. Obviously, I'm sure paying customers of Lux would get your writings and your musings and access to you. But if people want to find out more about this or anything else, where would be the best place to go?
No, great question. So actually, if you go to the luxresearchinc.com, we actually have blogs where we actually release some of these information, obviously more watered down, more curated version, shorter version for the general public. Of course, we reserve the sort of larger, data-laden reports for our paying clients. But anyone can access Lux Research to sort of get a quick glimpse of what we're up to. And we update our blog and our sort of news roundups weekly, very regularly. So definitely feel free to jump on there, and you can get a pretty good insight into what we're up to.
You guys definitely do. I was actually I actually have the 5G articles that you have booked, because 5G is, again, one of those things I'm trying to keep up on, because a lot of promises, but I have this really big gut feeling that 5G is just going to fall short of everyone's expectations, not through speed, but through coverage. And I'm just waiting for that shoe to drop. But until then, I will say you have a lot of great articles. And Nardev, I want to thank you for coming on the show. Sorry for keeping you late, but it was a very interesting conversation. Thank you for your expertise.
Absolutely, Ben. It was a great conversation. I learned a few things from you as well today. Really happy to be on the show, and thanks for having me, Ben.
Our pleasure, And of course, as always, we would like to extend you an open invitation. If there's any new topic, or Google decides that they've created the cure for humans and they start wiping us out, please come back on the show, and yeah, we'd love to talk to you again.
Absolutely, Ben. Thanks. I'll definitely give you a shout, and thanks to everyone who's listening to the podcast as well.
Absolutely. And everyone, thank you so much. Again, computeramerica.com, links to everyone. Nardev, until next time, have a great one. Goodbye.
Goodbye. Take care. See ya.
Bye. All right, everyone, and there he goes. And so with that being said, we have just enough time for computer and technology news. And but yeah, that was a great that was a great segment. Definitely like talking to him, and really Lux, I want to kind of extend a thank you to them for facilitating that. That was those are the kind of guests that we like to have on the show, expertise in their field. And honestly, when it came to healthcare and things like that, I think that he was very, very well versed in a lot of topics, not just what we covered, and it showed. So again, thank you to Lux Research for facilitating that. So with that being said, let's go ahead and continue on to computer and technology news, which is brought to you by Computer America. So everyone, let's go ahead and, this is healthcare to healthcare. It kind of makes sense. How about we talk about Toshiba? You remember them. Toshiba, check this one out. They say that their device, and yes, this is in the healthcare field, and we'll see if it's actually working, but Toshiba said that its device tests for 13 different cancer types with a 99% accuracy from a single drop of blood. That's right, one drop of blood, able to test for 13 different types of cancer. Of course, the question is, what were the rates, and what were the successes before that? How much blood did you need to suck from someone to test for 13 types of cancer? Was it 13 drops of blood? I don't know. Let's find out. So Toshiba developed the diagnosis method together with the National Cancer Center Research Institute in Tokyo Medical University, in hopes to commercialize it in several years. More to our points that we just made about every tech company is trying to get into the healthcare sector. They said that the method could be used to treat cancer in its early stages, although it's not really to treat cancer, but more to detect cancer. The method is designed to examine the types of concentration of microRNA molecules secreted in blood from cancer cells. And they mentioned that the other companies have Toray Industries Inc. and other companies have also developed technology to diagnose cancer using microRNA molecules from blood sample. So Toshiba isn't the only one, but they were the one who put this one out. And they said that compared to other companies' methods, we have an edge on the degree of accuracy in cancer detection. And trust me, false positives, they are a problem. You definitely don't want a false positive because that causes a lot of stress and just you don't want that. But of course, they would do follow-ups to really make sure that you actually do. But still, 99% accurate is amazing. And I guess, sorry, but the bigger threat isn't from false positives because you can test and weed those out, but the bigger threat would be false negatives, where you don't want to tell someone that they're free and clear and can ignore everything for another couple of years when really they could be receiving early treatment. And of course, as we know, the earlier the treatment, the better the outcome. So they mentioned that the test will be used to detect gastric, esophageal, lung, liver, biliary, tract, pancreatic, bowel, ovarian, prostate, bladder, and breast cancer, as well as sarcoma and glioma. There you go. Toshiba has developed a chip with a small device that can conduct the diagnosis in less than 2 hours, and a blood test using it is expected to cost 20,000 yen or less. What 20,000 yen relates to dollars? Let's see. So 20,000 to USD. Sorry about that. $180, which again just drives down the cost of healthcare. $180 as opposed to thousands and thousands of dollars of paying someone in a lab to do this. They said that it's possible that the device will be used in healthcare checkups, and its 5-year business strategy from April 2019, they position medical business, including genome analysis and cell diagnosis, as pillars, along with automation, batteries, digital solutions, and artificial intelligence, which for Toshiba sounds like they are in the same company as a lot of other tech companies. So best of luck to them. Now, let's go ahead and continue on. We have time for maybe 2 or 3 more articles. How about we discuss WeChat? And if, I know that we haven't been keeping the closest eye on the protests in Hong Kong, but this article did come up because this has to do with censorship. And as American, as Computer America, as American as we can be, we truly do value the idea of free speech. Admittedly, we don't, we like to think in a lot of regards our free speech here on the show doesn't really violate all that much. Like, we don't really offend that many people. If we offend the Chinese government, it's going to happen. So let's go ahead and cover this article. WeChat. WeChat keeps banning Chinese Americans for talking about the Hong Kong protest, saying that the Communist Party of China is censoring people in the United States, which, as we've seen, we also did articles about them being kicked out of NBA arenas and things like that, things that they were having, or protests were being supportive of Hong Kong, and Chinese influence in these industries was causing them to be kicked out of American venues, which is just insane, just insane, just bat crazy insane. So they mentioned that WeChat, a popular social media messaging app, has been censoring political messages and disabling people's accounts if they voice their support for the movement, even if they're in the United States, saying that Benji, an information security analyst at the Anderson Cancer Center in Houston, Texas, wrote the pro-China candidate totally lost in a WeChat group before having his account shut down. Did that actually happen? Let's check. He said that he's now part of a group of Chinese Americans who recently were censored on WeChat. He joined the group to talk about what's happening and discuss what could be done to make it stop. If you have censorship in China, fine, he said, but in this country, I'm a Republican, but on WeChat, I suffer the same as Democrats. Almost like they're the same people. Not to get political, but ladies and gentlemen, we're the same people. So, WeChat is owned by China's Tencent. As you know, Tencent actually owns a lot. If you want to check out what Tencent has a hand in, Well, short answer, it's about everything entertainment. In recent months, China's online censorship practices, China, put those words together until they make sense, have had remarkable power over Western companies as prominent figures in the U.S. speak out about the treatment of protesters in Hong Kong. Of course, we mentioned things like the Hearthstone player that was banned, the NBA and the general manager that was banned, and of course, Apple was pressured to take down an app that was being used by protesters to talk. So with that being said, let's go ahead and skip around this article because this one from The Verge is actually rather long. And yeah, they said that the WeChat user in Minnesota says that he's surprised Congress still hasn't acted. I came to the U.S. for freedom and democracy, but over the last few years, I feel that even though I'm an American, I'm monitored. I can't speak freely like I used to, even though I live in the U.S. It's and this was the main thrust of the conversation last time we had it here on the Computer America show. It's not just a tech war. It's not just this idea that, China bad, America good. It's a fundamental belief in freedom of speech, and it's a culture clash. It's definitely a value clash of between Chinese ideals and American ideals. And trust me, it's not that America is imposing them on China. It's that China is trying to exert influence on as many places as it possibly can. Be that Hong Kong, be that America, be that Taiwan, be that so many other places. It's just going to continue to get worse and worse. So with that being said, let's see if we can end on something a little lighter. And I actually like this one. So hopefully this isn't just a render. Check out this article. And if you're watching the video portion, lucky you. If not, imagine a Ford F-150 strapped to the back of a Tesla Cybertruck. And let's see what goes. So yeah, and this seems to, wait, oh no, the media can't be played. There we go. All right, so if you're watching the video portion, you can see here where you have a Ford F-150 and a Tesla Cybertruck back to back, and both of them are trying to pull. Both of them are trying to pull the other one way or another. And it looks like the Tesla Cybertruck completely dominates the Ford F-150, saying that the Cybertruck is able to out-tow quite easily an F-150, which is very important. Hey, it's able to do work. And you could see that in the video right there. They also mentioned that, and Sunny Madra, who works for Ford, they said, hey, Elon Musk, send us the Cybertruck and we'll do the apples to apples test for you. And yep, looks like Elon Musk might be sending Ford a Cybertruck so that they could do their own little tests. So there you go. They said that the Ford ex vice president responded by trying to jump the pre-order line and ask for a Cybertruck to do so that his company could do its own comparison. And this could be interesting, of course, since Tesla's battle versus the Porsche in Nürburgring. But if it actually takes place anytime soon, and it could depend on whether Ford brings one of the gas-powered production vehicles or that electric prototype it recently showed towing 1 million pounds. The Cybertruck isn't scheduled to start production until the end of 2021. But it's just a fun little competition, and again, you can see the video right there. It's just a fun competition to show that, the Cybertruck, this is what I was trying to say when it first... when it first tried to do its thing, is that Tesla wants to show that the Cybertruck isn't just a toy. It isn't just, kind of a dainty vehicle. That's why they tried to do the bulletproof, glass that shatter. That's why they're trying to, the giant wheels and things like that. It's a vehicle that can actually do work, and you're going to see a lot of these demonstrations leading up to the actual culmination of releasing this vehicle. You're going to see more and more of that. So with that being said, there you go. And honestly, seeing the Tesla, seeing the Tesla Cybertruck there on the road in kind of a real world lighting and condition, I thought it looked good before. I honestly did. Like I said, it looked like a a low-res version of the Halo Warthog, and I'm gonna stick with that. So I actually like the way it looks. Everyone, that's it for Computer America. We're flat out of time. That's what the music means. I want to thank you so much for tuning into the show. If you want to, follow us on social media, of course, computeramerica.com for everything that we're doing. Monday through Friday, 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. Eastern. We are off Thursday and Friday, everyone. So until next time, thank you so much. And hey, have a great one. Bye, everyone.